Steve Lennox. I am the president of Irish Network USA. Very excited to have everybody joining us today. We have some great guests who are dialed in, and not to mention all of you from across the country today. This is our third weekly virtual coffee with Irish Network USA. We started this series as COVID-19 was really holding us all back from being together. As we all know now, we lost St. Patrick's Day, unfortunately, in many ways. So we wanted to make sure that our friends, our members, everybody we care about across the country got to stick together, got to continue communicating. We know communication is key. And just to continue to feel that sense of togetherness, which is something Irish Network USA has always really strived for. So today we're going to talk a little bit about not so much the health impact of COVID-19. I mean, we know that COVID-19 has caused devastation in places like New York and New Jersey and around the world. It's taken too many lives. We now know that the trick to saving those lives obviously is by staying apart, which is what we're doing. We're exercising social distancing. But more importantly, what we wanted to talk today about is what is the Irish community doing to sort of make sure we bounce back appropriately and take care of the folks that we need to take care of. And the first person we're going to welcome is our very good friend, Ambassador Dan Mulhall.
It's been a very strange time for me and for everyone else, obviously. What I can say is that the embassy and our consulates have been working away. Our priority over the last 4 weeks has really been consular focused. My colleagues around the world have presided over the repatriation of 5,000 people from different parts of the world. We weren't very heavily involved in that exercise because there are still flights from the US to Ireland, and of course via London and other European capitals. There are many more options available, so nobody can be stranded here in the US at this stage. Our main focus has been to try to encourage those who are here on short-term basis to return home, because first of all, we're worried that, well, we were worried, and maybe it's not so much the case now, but we were worried at one point that the flight options might narrow and might eventually be down to a point where it wouldn't be possible for people to get home from here. We didn't want people stranded here. Secondly, we were worried about people inadvertently overstaying their visas and getting themselves into trouble with the authorities here and creating problems for themselves for the future. Thirdly, we were worried that those who were here on a short-term basis might lose their jobs and their financial security might not be guaranteed. And then finally, we were concerned that travel insurance that, say, for example, J1 students might not be able to cope with the cost of hospitalization here in the event of a serious bout of coronavirus. So for all those reasons, we have been recommending that people go home. And most of those who are here have taken our advice and have gone home. I checked, for example, with one of our major cell phone providers, and they told me that in normal circumstances, this time of the year, they would have 15,000 plus of their mobile phones roaming in the United States. At the moment, this was about 2 weeks ago, they were down to 1,200. So you can see that the number of people here on a sort of short-term basis has gone down dramatically. Some J1 visa holders are still hanging on, believing that they're able to weather the storm here, and people have to make their own decisions. Ultimately, we can only advise, we can only offer generalized travel advice, the best judgment we can make, but individual people have their own circumstances and have to weigh their circumstances themselves in order to make a decision on whether to stay or to go home. But our recommendation has been and continues to be to go home. We will continue to offer emergency services to Irish citizens here. The other thing we've been trying to do is we've been maintaining very, very active contact with the Irish organizations, particularly the welfare organizations around the United States. And we're keen to be helpful in any way we can. And the Department of Foreign Affairs has created, has created mechanisms by which we can be helpful to our welfare organizations. And our consulates are working very closely with them. And I think you'll find that there is almost daily contact now between the welfare organizations that we have in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco. We've also been concerned about the continuity of Irish organizations, in particular organizations that perhaps generate most of their funding from activities that they conduct, which have not been possible. A lot of these organizations would generate significant funding, for example, around the St. Patrick's Day period, and most of those activities didn't take place this year. So a lot of these organizations, cultural and other Irish organizations, have suffered significant hits, and we're trying to see what we can do to help those organizations to tie them over and keep them going, because we want to have, when this thing ends, we want to have a full suite of Irish and Irish American organizations, because that's what gives our community here a genuine sense of community.
That's great. And this idea of making sure there's continuity with the global Irish organizations, as we like to call them, or the Irish welfare organizations, this is obviously a priority of Irish Network USA as well. You know, we stand ready to be as supportive as we can be, all these centers across the country. You know, our goal has always been diverse and inclusive in terms of our membership and what we're doing to help out and to keep these bridges as strong as ever. We were proud in our first call to welcome the Coalition of Irish Immigration Centers. Aileen called in and gave us a quick briefing on what they've been up to. Of course, we're going to welcome your counterpart, your colleague in a few minutes, Ciaran. But can we go back a minute, Ambassador? Let's just go back, maybe a bit of storytelling here. A month ago, you were in Washington, D.C., and this was just sort of starting to brew, really, and we were starting to see the seriousness of the impact. But you welcomed the Taoiseach, right? Taoiseach Varadkar was down there in Washington, D.C., and a wide range of Irish delegation leaders were there. But tell me what the situation was like this March. It must have been different than any other.
Well, I mean, I've done St. Patrick's Day activities in 10 different countries over my 40-year career, so I have a lot to compare it with. This was the most extraordinary Patrick's Day we've ever had, because remember that the Taoiseach announced the first social distancing measures that we imposed, or that we brought into place on the steps of Blair House in Washington, D.C. on the 12th of March. So if you like, the Irish response, which was the first move that was announced that day, was the closure of schools from the following Monday. So that was done from the steps of Blair House in Washington, D.C. So that set the tone for the day, which meant that whereas normally the big thing would have been, you know, the St. Patrick's Day activities here in the United States, in fact, for the traveling media and for the Taoiseach's delegation, they were dealing with an unprecedented crisis at home and taking decisions here, which, of course, were followed on from in the days that followed. And then on St. Patrick's Day, you had the Taoiseach giving his address to the nation and announcing further restrictions, which were added to a week later. So, if you like, the response to the crisis on the part of the Irish government started here in Washington, D.C. At that time, by the way, I mean, I was hearing fairly apocalyptic kind of suggestions of how Ireland might be affected. I mean, there were certainly, you know, people who were worried about our health service being overwhelmed. The Taoiseach said, in fact, that there would be 15,000 cases of coronavirus by the end of March. In fact, there were only 3,000. So that indicates the extent to which the measures that were taken in Ireland actually succeeded in flattening the curve. And I saw the Minister for Health last week saying that this week we would have 120,000 cases had we done nothing. 120,000 cases in a day had we done nothing. So we're now having about, say, 500-600 cases a day. So, and the ratio of people who are infected, who have contact with others, is now down under 1, which means that the number of cases will drop. So it has been, I think, I mean, you can't say positive, but it's certainly the outcomes for Ireland so far, and we're only part of the way through this crisis, but the outcomes so far for Ireland have been maybe less cataclysmic than had been feared at the beginning of this outbreak. So social distancing is being observed, and unlike here, you don't see the same partisan arguments in Ireland. I mean, there's been none of that at all. And the issue of, you know, we must open the economy come what may, you don't hear that argument in Ireland either. People are obviously keen to get back to normal life, but there's a kind of a consensus that can only be done when public health conditions allow that. But to go back to the Taoiseach's visit, I mean, we did have the Patrick's Day, which you heard on the 12th of March here, was truncated. But we did have the breakfast with the Vice President at the Vice President's home. We did have the meeting in the Oval Office with the President, and that, as you say, Taoiseach was the last foreign leader to meet President Trump and will be for some time to come, no doubt. And that meeting went, according to plan, and it was a good meeting. And then we had the lunch over at Capitol Hill, hosted by the Speaker and attended by a lot of senior people from Congress, including Mitch McConnell, who turned up and gave a speech on behalf of his Republican colleagues in the Senate. So and then of course the afternoon reception at the White House was cancelled. I had to cancel our big reception for 800 people because I simply couldn't justify bringing together that number of people in a relatively confined space. And then I also cancelled our evening dinner, which we normally have at the embassy to wrap up the day, because that would have had 100 people, squeezed in to the embassy residence, which really wouldn't have been sensible. And of course, I took the Taoiseach to the airport that day or that evening to catch a flight to Dublin, and I said to him as he was leaving, good luck, and do your best to keep us safe. And I think so far, I think the general sort of consensus would be that our handling of the crisis has been, pretty successful. But there's lots more to come. There's lots more issues. Economically, obviously, we've taken a hit. We have the fastest growing economy in Europe for the last 5 years. This year we'll be in big and minus territory. But the positive thing is that the predictions for next year are fairly positive. There's an expectation that we will bounce back. Of course, these expectations are all dependent on how the virus develops and what the actual impact turns out to be at the end of the day. The confidence in Ireland is still very strong. Obviously, we're going to have to manage a new world after this virus. And I can see, for example, that in America, there's a lot more emphasis now being placed on supply chains and keeping those supply chains intact and not being dependent on faraway places for vital inputs to those supply chains. The point I'll be making, and the point I hope our friends around the United States, including everyone on this call, will be making, is that Ireland ought to be seen as a absolutely rock solid source of goods and services for the United States. In other words, a kind of a platform, if you like, for American business, and that you can have complete reliance on the integrity of supply chains from Ireland. We will have to present ourselves as a country that is in a unique position because of the connections we have, because of the relative proximity of Ireland to the United States, and the fact that in normal times there are 22 cities connected here in the United States with Dublin and with Ireland. So I think that's going to be an important point to make, is that we're not, we can't be regarded as a sort of a distant, dodgy, unreliable economic partner, that we are rock solid and that we will be able to be part of the US supply chain, into the future, and that there should be no disruption of the US-Ireland economic trade and investment link, which ought to continue to develop because it benefits both of our countries.
As you say, we're kind of moving on from helping those who aren't resident here to figure out what we can do to help those who are resident here. And of course, it's those who are most vulnerable, those who are who may have been working off the books, first of all, who have not paid into Social Security, whether that was for reasons of being undocumented or for other reasons. And that's probably where the need will be greatest. And the one thing I want to say, and you will get a chance, of course, to hear from the people behind this, the Slánte 2020 in New York has just been a stunning example of the community coming together. You'll hear from Paul Finnegan from the New York Irish Centre, and from the chairman of the New York County GA Board, and a few other groups came together to pull together resources to support those in greatest need, to support people in cases of real hardship. The county associations have come on board with that, and there's always speculation the county associations are coming to the end of their life cycle, because as communities age out, and here you can see the community coming together at every level, every age and shape of organisation and person is pulling together financially and organisationally.
Obviously, Ciaran just mentioned a little bit about Slowing to 2020, the new initiative that a bunch of the welfare groups and the GAA have come together to form in New York to sort of make sure that the global Irish have the support they need. Paul, why don't we start with you? Just want to give us an overview of exactly what Slowing to 2020 is and what the goals are?
Sure, Steve. Thank you, by the way, for bringing this together today and allowing us to talk about Sláinte 2020. And a quick shout out to Ambassador Mulhall, of course, and our local CG in New York here in Madden. Ciaran had mentioned a little bit about what Sláinte 2020 is already. At its highest level, it's a collaboration of 5 organizations in the area that are very connected to the local community, very keen to watch out for the welfare of the local community, and they would be ourselves, the New York Irish Centre, the Ashling Centre, who are situated in Yonkers, the Emerald Isle Immigration Centre, who have a foothold in Woodside, Queens, and also in Woodlawn in the Bronx. We have also the New York GAA, which is everywhere, the ubiquitous organization, and also the United Irish Counties, which is a great organization of people affiliated by county in the region here. So basically, as this problem began to break, our first mission is to say, well, what's the impact on the local Irish community here, and who will be impacted the most? Now, I could talk about the needs of seniors and so on and so forth, but it was quickly understood that we should look to the most vulnerable straight away. And so it was actually Katrina Clark, the chairperson of the Ashling Centre in Yonkers, that was the catalyst for the conversation at the very beginning. I don't think she's on the call, but I just wanted to mention that. But we quickly determined that those that would be suffering the most, because it's a health crisis, that's one level, but beyond that, there was the financial crisis. So we looked at what would the impact of the financial crisis be on our community, and we looked at the most vulnerable, and they would be people that have no safety net whatsoever, that would be out of work and out of work quickly, and would have no recourse to government aid. And as we know, the safety net in the United States is not great as it is, but there are some that would have no safety net whatsoever, and they would include the undocumented. So what industries would they be working in? The people that would be most vulnerable, and they would be the hospitality industries, the restaurants, the bars, etc., and also the construction trades. And both those industries have shut down completely in this region. So we decided to get together, and we knew that there would be a community response, which would be, as always, as we saw in Hurricane Sandy, as we saw even in the aftermath of 9/11, there would be a community response here that would be huge and enormous. And how would we channel that? How would we get that? How would we create a clearinghouse of all this goodwill so that we could get the generosity of the community to those in need as quickly as possible? So the decision was we should get a website together as quickly as possible, and we actually we launched a website within a week, and it's actually a very sophisticated website. We were fortunate to have some people on our staff that were in the right demographic age-wise to be able to turn these things around quickly. Stephen Long on my staff has been brilliant in putting our website together. And we launched a website called Sláinte2020.org in the last 48 hours. So it's up and running as we speak. So again, the initiative we decided to call it was Sláinte 2020. There's an offline component to it as well. We've approached many organizations for seed money to build up a fund. And I'd say as of this morning, we've raised about $60,000. That's came from ourselves and the 2 other Irish centers, but the United Irish Counties, the GAA, subdivisions of the GAA. Maybe Joan can speak to that. But already we've gathered in $60,000. The website allows for individual donations, and we have several thousand gathered there already. So we're off to a fantastic start within 48 hours in this initiative. So there is an application process through the website, and once an application is submitted, there will be a review of the application by members of our 5 organizations, and there will be financial assistance given to those that submit a valid application that has been vetted and references have been checked and the situation has been determined to be legitimate. So there's a lot of work for us ahead in terms of determining how the fund is distributed to those most in need. We anticipate the needs will be greatly centered around the payment of rent and also anything to do with food insecurity. So we are looking at those at the moment. Actually, in the last day, we've seen upwards of 10 applications come in already. So $60,000 might sound like a lot, but you know, if the need continues to grow as anticipated, we do see that there will be a strain on that fund very quickly. And so that's why it's an ongoing effort. I think we're going to have to do this on a long-term recurring effort for the next couple of months, at least until things start to turn around. Hopefully they will.
I mean, each of those clubs could vary in size from 40 or 50 members and upwards, depending. We've 15 minor clubs, we've 13 collective in the ladies, so it's a total of 73 clubs. I think this, from the senior board perspective, I think our membership, Karina, you'd be able to verify with me as well, because Karina's involved with a club. I think we're in the region of 4,000 to 5,000 members just at one level, and that's not including what the ladies membership is and what our underage structure is. So it's a huge, huge organization here. I mean, our membership is phenomenal. And ultimately, I think we're also the hardest hit sector at the moment, because an awful lot of our members would be, our younger generation members would be in the hospitality section, which ultimately is shut down. A lot of them are young, you know, first time away from home, you know, don't have that rainy day fund, and ultimately those that do, they're eating into it already. So from an organizational point, trying to cater to that many members, it wouldn't be financially viable for us as much and all as we'd love to. But getting together with the other 4 entities to form Sláinte and coming together collectively as a community was just something that the New York GAA had to be involved in, and had no problem whatsoever jumping in and putting a shoulder to the wheel to assist. I believe Paul mentioned we've about 10 applications. I think it's 12, and I think currently I have 6 of those on my desk to vet.
Responses from people who really find it comforting to hear some lines of poetry which kind of, if you like, try to break the gloom. These days I'm choosing, carefully, poems and parts of poems that have a kind of a message that's uplifting. And one of the things I find most strongly is that people want to be reminded of the things they're missing. So they want to be reminded of the natural world that they can't fully experience because they're limited to a walk of 2 kilometers from their homes or whatever. And therefore, for example, this week, I saw a couple of times the word poetry, the hashtag poetry was trending on Twitter, which is remarkable. It wouldn't normally be like that, but I think people probably are looking for inspiration. So what I like to do is recite W.B. Yeats's Lake Alivinish Free, because it kind of, if you like, it brings us back to the west of Ireland. And it was written in London in the early 1890s, when he was walking along one of the streets, I think the Strand in London, and heard a little fountain in the window of a shop, and this reminded him and brought him back to the Lake Alivinish Free. So, and I remember my first posting in India in 1980. I went to lunch with the grandmother of a friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine, who happened to be, the grandmother was the sister of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, and a great lady in her own right. And when she met me, she recited this poem by heart. She was a woman in her 80s, but had never forgotten the poem. And it's called The Lake Alivinish Free. I will arise and go now, and go to Inish Free. And a small cabin built there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement grey. I hear it in the deep heart's core.